Dina, it's wonderful, wonderful to be here with you today. Look, you and I know each other. We've worked on an article before in Fast Company on how, strategic leadership and how they should be emotional, which I loved working with you on. But we're going to go much, much deeper than that in this conversation. We're going to talk about your book, of course, which you've co-authored with Elisa Grandi. Emotionally Charged is the big main title. Look, it is a proper piece of work on a topic that hasn't been covered well or frankly at all in many places. It's richly researched, it's very easy to follow, and there is plenty of stimuli we can all use in whatever role, career, job we have in any organization. So many congratulations and welcome to the show.
Thank you both for the very kind words and the invitation to join you.
Pleasure. So you'd think that organizations, the robots haven't taken over yet. Organizations are based on people, right? People capital. We are emotional, of course, as people. Mm-hmm. But our understanding and application of emotions in business, in my view, is still rather primitive. What's going on, just to set the scene for us?
It is rather primitive. And I think there's a number of reasons for that. First off, despite mountains of evidence to the contrary, organizations are rife with misinformation and myths about emotions. For example, that negative emotions might ruin relationships, when we know actually the opposite is true when shared appropriately. Right? That leaders are going to be less effective if they dive too much into the emotion. And once again, it's on balance, but we know that leaders who share their emotions appropriately are far more effective than leaders who do not. And last but not least, there's a feeling that emotions could somehow get in the way of decision-making or good business. And so there's just a number of myths that cause people to devalue emotions, ignore emotions, suppress emotions, and fake emotions at work. And a lot of it, honestly, it kind of goes back to the Industrial Revolution, where being emotional was sort of the antithesis of rationality. And old norms, of course, die hard. And this one just won't seem to go away. So one of the things that we're hoping to achieve with our book is actually to put some scientifically accurate information about the value of emotions and the role of emotions at work out there.
Well, you've definitely done that. It's interesting, that point about the Industrial Revolution. There is still a myth in many organizations, even ones that perform, at least in the short term, rather well, which is put your head down, put on a mask, work really hard, and indeed, being emotional is a sign of, weakness, if nothing else. And what do you say to an individual who, has that mindset, and perhaps, and often, I have to say, often middle-aged men are some of the worst at this, and not just the Brits, where you might think we're repressed, which we're not, by the way. That's another myth. But what do you say to somebody who has heard about this interest in science and emotions, but frankly thinks, I've done pretty well with putting my head down, not showing my emotions. What do you say to them?
Yeah, I'd say a few things. First off, sometimes that's actually necessary and the most adaptive thing you can do. By all means, like there are times when faking or suppressing is sort of what you need to do in that moment. And hopefully we can dive more into the nuance there. But I would say largely, it's time to really reconsider that. That's very dated thinking. We know that people who share their emotions, and I'm going to use the word again appropriately, because I'm never talking about really just letting it all hang out. They have more fulfilling careers. They have higher performance. They're more effective as a leader, and they're able to sustain their well-being. When we, over time, fake, ignore, suppress our emotions, there are some very, very real costs which are amplified for leaders. But for people in general, when you do this, if we just start with some of the health costs, People who tend to not express their feelings suffer more physical pain, deal with more insomnia, have more compulsive behaviors when it comes to food and alcohol, over time have more cardiovascular issues. And so there's some very real personal costs.
That's very powerful.
Right? And leaders who actually are in tune with and acknowledge and accept emotions as like the data that they actually are able to build trust more quickly. Right? They have stronger relationships and are more effective as leaders. So there's just so many reasons why it's time that we all need to move beyond that dated and very inaccurate thinking that showing emotions makes you soft or ineffective, because in reality, it makes you courageous and more effective. And I guess the one thing I'll say, just to add to that, is, but I also kind of get it. There are cultures that are dated in their thinking, right? And so it can feel very vulnerable to buck the cultural norms, especially when the tone that is being set at the top is one where leadership is about strength. It is about certainty. It is not about sadness, anxiety, or not having the answer. Yes. It's hard to go against that when that is where the power is held, and therefore, your livelihood. So I very much appreciate the tension that can exist there. And so, my beg of the universe is let leaders at the top start first.
Yes. Well, if that's not a compelling case, I don't know what is. I mean, the last 2 or 3 minutes, that is a compelling case. It was interesting. I've worked all across the world, and I've worked in cultures where that picture you just painted is very, very accurate. Particularly in plenary situations, big meetings, committee situations. But actually, ultimately, I'm not simplifying just for the sake of it, but when you actually talk one-to-one with these individuals and you gain their trust, they will often share. But actually, when there are certain norms in a group, whether it is about the organization, the team specifically, or the culture in society. So I guess part of using your emotions skillfully is knowing when, right? And in what context.
Yeah. Yes. When, what context, how much. And, the truth is some people have more wiggle room than others. So men with power, when seen crying, are oftentimes, this halo is bestowed upon them, right? They're sensitive, feeling. Women who are seen crying at work are weak, are too emotional. Yes. The same holds true with expressing anger. Men of color, they face more penalties when they show anger. And so there's sort of a lot of complexity to the emotions, such that it really is a person and context decision. I just don't want to ignore the reality that some people need to exist within, where they need to sort of walk this tighter line with expression.
It's such a skillful act, isn't it? How to use your emotions in what context. And also going back to earlier, because you gave me a little tease, you said, are we going to delve into this topic? When there are moments where actually suppressing, at least for the moment, emotions may be more powerful. Can you say a little bit more about that?
Sure. There may just be situations that come up at work where it's not the time or the place, right? Or you're too activated to express something constructively. By all means, I would suggest that people take a beat and sort of process what they feel after the fact, and then determine, once they have their prefrontal cortex more online, sort of the most strategic way to express that emotion, if indeed sharing it is wise. It's very nuanced. There's not one pat answer for when, how, or how much to express emotions. What I am certain of, though, is that we do need to evolve workplaces into systems that attune to and accept emotions for the data that they really are. Because that's the fact of emotions. It is, and it's what really turned me on to paying attention to emotions, is the fact that it's a data source, and to ignore this information, it's really can be to your peril, and to your performance detriment. And so, I would love to see all
that point there, and that point. I mean, everything you're saying is on point. But that point there, and specifically, I've been in meetings. I've probably done this themselves. We're being so focused on the subject matter, the content, the substance, that actually what the person is conveying through how they're looking, how they're coming across, or at least the assumptions we're making. It's like, everyone's talking about the specific problem, and then when you debrief after, it's like, how are they coming across? Oh, well, I didn't really notice. You're just missing, some of the picture, which informs better thinking, better decision making. But let's continue this theme of making it even more real. So you're going into, or you're in an emotionally charged environment.
Yeah.
Tempers may be flaring. It's a delicate topic. There's sensitivity, whatever it is.
Mm-hmm.
Just help listeners work through, if you like, a simple framework. I know there's a number of frameworks in your book, but a framework to preparing yourself, playing through those moments. So actually, you don't come out like a shriveled blob. That's a technical term, or you come out in good shape, even if it's been a difficult moment.
Yeah, I think there's, I guess the first thing I would like to say is there are any wide variety of strategies for regulating emotions. And one of the most important things to understand is the strategies that are most effectively used to prepare for an event are different from some of the strategies that you can best use during an event when, let's say, you do get triggered, versus how you can recover most expeditiously afterwards. So we can kind of play this out depending on timing. So let's just take your scenario first, which is, let's say you're going into a meeting where people are, have polarized opinion, tempers are going to flare, you're just really kind of concerned about how it's all going to go down. There are 4 different strategies that can help you best prepare for emotionally charged events. The first one really is a long game. So I'll just touch on it very quickly, which is it is fundamental to understand what is triggering for you emotionally, and really tune into what are the things that are going to set me off, and what are the things that are really positively energizing for me. Because with self-awareness around your triggers and what is like energizing and restorative for you, you're so much better able to sort of engineer your days, your career, as well as prepare for these moments that could otherwise waylay you. So this has got a longer tail to it, but it is one of the 4 S's that we recommend for being proactive about emotional regulation at work. The other 3 are, you're more able to use them sort of daily, weekly. And so the first one is about setting your focus. So often when we're facing something that we're worried about or not looking forward to, we bury our head in the sand, right? We just try to get emails done or otherwise ignore it until the moment is upon us. Yes. I highly recommend you abandon that strategy for one of a multitude of others, like visualizing success. We know from sports psychology the power of visualizing successful resolution in clutch moments. And so visualizing how you will respond in a meeting where temper is going to flare, is a highly effective strategy. So is imagining positive outcomes as opposed to planning for the sky to fall in, and even being grateful for the opportunity, which may sound absurd, but thinking it's so great that we're getting this out on the table as opposed to, pushing it under the table. Even that unlocks higher performance in a stressful situation. So that is the second S with a few little subpoints. And then there's two others that are really proven methods for proactively managing your relationships or managing emotionally charged moments. One is situation selection or selecting your battles, right? We do not need to go into every meeting, right? Yes. If Jane from finance just gets under your skin, who on your team maybe is really looking to bone up on their finance skills, for example, like really thinking about, do I need to be participating in this situation? It's a valid strategic decision, because there may be ways to redesign it that are better for your well-being as well as the outcomes. And if you do need to enter situations that are very, very difficult and activating for you, thinking about how you can modify the situation to change its emotional impact is another very successful strategy. And without getting into too much detail, I'll just stop right there and see sort of where else you might want to go with that.
No, I think that's very, very powerful. I'm curious then, when you've had that moment and you've done everything, you've read the book, you've listened to what you've said, been a good student and practitioner, it still can take it out of you, right? So how do you best recover?
Yeah. For sure. Let's just say we're all human, right? We're going to make mistakes. We are going to lose our cool. We're going to show up in ways that we wish we hadn't. We're going to get more depleted by situations, even when we've done all our proper preparation. Like this is just part of being human. So first, please have some self-compassion, right? When things haven't broken your way, because it is hard to control all the variables. But after, an especially hard meeting, an especially hard day, an especially hard week, or even quarter, there are ways that we can better restore ourselves. And we do have a lot of frameworks because this book has so much really important information, and you got to simplify it somehow. So in terms of recovering from emotionally demanding situations, instead of the 4 S's, we offer you the 3 R's. And so one of the methods is reframing, which is just a way of thinking about reappraising the event. So if we take that same situation where the meeting has been hot and maybe some people have, left with their feathers ruffled, there's a way to look at that that's probably going to make you feel terrible if you're the leader of that group, which is, oh my gosh, I completely let things get out of hand. People are really upset. This is no good. Alternatively, and I would never suggest sort of rose-colored glasses or Pollyannish, you could think to yourself, I've created a situation where people feel safe to share how they really feel about things. Right? This is going to result in a totally different set of feelings and actions you might take after that are going to be more effective. So there's reframing the event. I've also talked about self-compassion, which is really reframing how you think about yourself as the leader of that team or that meeting. And I think too many leaders think of self-compassion as soft, or if they do that, it's going to take away their edge. And again,
indulgent.
It's indulgent.
Yeah.
Yes, it'll somehow get in the way of their continued success. And again, nothing is further from the truth. We know that self-compassion is better for performance. It's better for your health. And importantly, it's reciprocal. So when you actually show more self-compassion, it unlocks more compassion for others. which can sometimes be the compelling argument that some people need. But so reframing is one of the three R's.
What are the other two?
The other two is reflecting. Too often, and I was 100% guilty of this for far too long, we would just because the emotions, you don't have the time to attend to them at that moment, or because you find them inconvenient or distracting, you put them in a little cabinet, right? In the back of your head, you lock that cabinet up and you throw out the key. But it's actually really important to sort of empty out the coffers. And you can do this effectively through writing, journaling, is a proven method. And some people that really works for them. That actually is not my preferred method. I'd much rather think it through, talk to my dog, maybe talk to other people. But somehow processing the things that you felt is really important. Yes. To just acknowledge them. And accept those as real and valid. And then last but not least, there's really restoring energy. So things that are energetically depleting, they really do tap your energy. And it's important to sort of replenish your stores. And so, it kind of goes back to that whole, put your own oxygen mask on first. There's a lot of validity to that. And there are, certain ways we can restore ourselves that are more effective than others. And so we get into all of that in the book.
Yeah. So that's about reframing, reflecting, and restoring. That's very powerful.
You're a good student.
Thank you. I get at least maybe an 8 out of 10. Not even that. I mean, it is published by Oxford, so take that chip off my shoulder. Anyway, I'm curious about situations where colleagues, co-workers, bosses share too much or talk too much about emotions. I've worked with people at extremes. I've probably been at extremes myself, so I don't want to cast aspersions where I've either sucked it all up, and actually sometimes that can be effective, as you've alluded to, but other times I've sort of come to a situation where actually people are comfortable talking about emotions, but they've just brought too much, either workplace-based emotions or stuff outside of work that people think, wow, this is just too much. If you're on the receiving end of somebody who's just, I don't know, overdoing it bluntly, how do you deal with it?
Yeah. Like you said, there can be, both ends of the spectrum can be maladaptive. I think the important thing to recognize right now is that, leaders are being tasked with handling more negative emotions and weightier situations than ever before. So leaders have always been audience for, and rightfully so, for employees' frustrations, right, with maybe a coworker, or the fact that they didn't get promoted, or discouragement that a project they've been working on has no longer gets funding. Whatever the case may be, leaders have always been audience for that. And that is, of course, continued. But now, because employee expectations have changed, which really, kind of there was an inflection point during the pandemic, but employees do expect leaders now to listen to them and support them with challenges that are more personal in nature. And so leaders are audience to more conversations about people's personal problems, whether it's marital strife or a child that's struggling, or the fact that they're having panic attacks, or they're struggling with depression, or even that they've lost their beloved dog. I mean, leaders are just audience to a lot of stuff that can be heavy. And there can come a personal toll from being audience to and handling too many negative emotions. And I am not suggesting that leaders turn a blind eye or a deaf ear to that, but it is important to learn how to handle that, just like doctors and therapists do, right?
Yes, yes.
Right? They sit in front of trauma and pain all day long, and there's only like a couple ways that they're able to sustain themselves amidst all of that without suffering burnout and compassion fatigue.
They have to have their own habits, right? They need to. I know one who literally religiously, not in a religious sense, but systematically, I should say, has either a bath or a shower after the session. Not because they're uncaring about the individual, but it's a way of just saying, I'm done for today. I've that's my way of sort of finishing the session. Because otherwise, as you say, it's very easy for it to build up. And then when actually you need to perform your task, you don't have the energy and I guess the clarity to focus on what you do well.
That's right. And so not everybody likes to shower at the end of work. Like lots of people shower in the morning types. So I totally appreciate like the ritual and really like the symbolic nature of that act for that person. But there's something that everybody can use. And it starts with understanding that there are different kinds of empathy. Right? Most of us think of empathy as just one thing, but there's actually 3 different types of empathy. The first is cognitive empathy. And so cognitive empathy is really about putting yourself into the mind of the other person. Mm-hmm. So understanding their pain or their struggles, but from a cognitive perspective, understanding how they think about it or their perspective on it. This is one type of empathy. A second type of empathy is emotional empathy. And this is really feeling what other people feel, like really taking on the emotions that they're feeling in the situation. And then the third type is compassionate empathy or empathic concern. And that is taking compassionate action that relates to the struggles that have been shared with you. Now, where leaders can get into trouble is when they overutilize empathic empathy, when they take on too much of the feeling of the situation. And this can happen really sort of easily. You just like sponge it in, especially if you're a natural empath. And so one of the techniques that can be very helpful for leaders is to try to adopt a more cognitive empathy form of approach when they sit as audience for true employee struggles and pain. And it's about being an information seeker. Like that's the way to action that is to ask questions, right? And these questions can help you be a better leader for that person, to provide them with help that is more on target without absorbing all of that negative emotion and suffering some of the collateral damage that can occur when you do that. And so sort of leaning a little heavier into the cognitive empathy and then showing your empathy by taking compassionate action are 2 ways that you can really, really like well address the situation without some of the collateral damage.
That's so powerful. That point on cognitive empathy is also very powerful when you are dealing with somebody who shows up in different ways, comes from a different culture. I mean, because some people, for whatever reason, may not show much emotion, but actually may be very emotionally, but they've found ways to cope. It's not done, or that's just how they show up in the world. And hence, focusing so much on sort of what you're taking in, the sensing, the feeling, and the compassion may not actually get you that far. Yeah. But actually, the cognitive approach may be very powerful by asking careful questions, really listening to what they're saying. And you just giving people another toolbox, which is you can play, you should use and utilize and play with these different approaches, again, depending on the context you're in, rather than saying, oh, right, here's time for emotions. Here we go. Right, apply this. It has to be a much more nuanced approach, right?
Yeah. The other thing I would say is, I realize that this can be a lot for leaders, right? Having to handle these new conversations when, they haven't had training in clinical psychology, right? And all of a sudden they're sitting audience to some things that feel really weighty. I'd say a couple additional things. One is being audience to this kind of like pain and struggle that is very real in organizations. It's so fundamental for organizational effectiveness. Like, you are doing something that is like so good, and there are ways to be there for that person without overstepping your boundaries.
Yes.
But I implore you to like savor the fact you are someone that this person has chosen to trust with some really personal information. Like that's pretty powerful. And by doing so, you are enabling them to honestly to like get back to work, because they know they've been heard and they can re-engage with the task at hand, as opposed to exerting all of this effort to not express what's happening for them.
Gosh, that's powerful. That's powerful. It's interesting. Many executives, senior executives, CEOs, will have a varying backgrounds, but often they have a finance background. Some have an MBA. You can't help but think that more of them will either want to or need to have a psychology background. But that's just a reflection of what you were saying there. And just continuing that theme, Dina, if you were speaking with, and I know you do, speaking with a CEO of a corporation or a founder of an organization, they'd listened to this Lancefield on the Line podcast and thought it was amazing, of course, especially the guest. What would you, and they were open-minded enough to seek counsel about how to be skillful, how to be even strategic with their emotions, and you only had a minute or two, what would you want to impress upon them?
I would want to impress a couple things. One is, because I think it's compelling, especially for more head-driven leaders, is that they are ignoring fundamental data and information and feedback that can help them perform at higher levels, unleash new levels of motivation and performance in others, and enable organizational health that doesn't currently exist. It will hit their bottom line. You will have less turnover and higher performance when you attend to all of the emotions that exist on a team.
Yeah.
So I would argue that. Secondly, I would say, come work with me, because there's so much rich emotional terrain that's really just there for the mining. And so many leaders, this is not something you're taught in school. It's not. We're taught how to think critically, right? It's not something that has historically been part of leadership development programs, right? It's not there either. And so unless you had exceptionally enlightened role models as parents, which I would humbly suggest many of us did not, or you've worked with a therapist for a long time, there's so much to be gained by tuning in to not just what you're thinking and examining assumptions and limiting beliefs and new perspectives, but all that emotional terrain that sits underneath the surface that can provide you with such compelling information that'll help you get closer and more quickly to the things that you care about most.
Well, you've convinced me there, especially with that poetic language. I always delve into the guests in a little bit more detail, and I'm curious, through the work you've been doing on the book and obviously before on emotions, what's the single biggest change you've made to your own coaching practice as a result of your newfound wisdom?
I think I have fundamentally changed over the course of time, and even further as I spent like several years so deep in the science of emotions, which I give them far more respect than I used to. I was, earlier in my career as a management consultant and a leader myself, I did find negative emotions, especially, more inconvenient. I held the perspective they were going to get in the way of my productivity and my results. And so I really didn't attend to them. I could compartmentalize like on Olympic levels, in ways that I now can see in the rearview mirror, or ultimately less effective, and to my own, personal sort of detriment and well-being. So I now just really see such profound value into tuning into them and inquiring into, what sits below them. And this shows up in my coaching, right? Similar to how I was suggesting that I would speak with a CEO. This is what comes up in my coaching, is not just looking at sort of like the thinking involved in a situation, in terms of assumptions and beliefs and new ways of thinking about or reframing things, but also the emotions, like what people are actually feeling. Because it is an overlooked source of information and value for us.
Yes. And when you're having your best possible day, smashing it out of the park, or the analogy is possible, doing really great work, what are the personal habits or practices that help you do that work?
Yeah. I'd say there's 4 things that are they actually unify all of us as humans. And when I have these dialed in, I'm doing great too. So I'll just start with there, and then I'll add like my own sort of like personal silver bullet for the world's ills. So there's 4 things that profoundly affect all of us in terms of our performance and well-being and effectiveness as a leader. And you really do need to get a good night of sleep. You need to eat some good food. You need to move your body, right? And you need some strong and positive social relationships. These things profoundly affect us day in, day out. And at the same time, I fully recognize there are times where it's hard to get a good night's sleep, for example, right? You're traveling across time zones. You have a baby at home, like whatever the case may be, life does come up. But trying to optimize across those 4 areas when you can and how you can will help you in every which way. And so do I give myself an A across those 4 categories? Occasionally, right? But I do try. I'm aware. And I know I feel great when I've done these 4 things. But the thing that for me is, oh gosh, it's energizing, it's relaxing, it helps me detach, it challenges me, is riding horses. And so not everybody even likes horses. Many people are scared of horses. But for me, this is the hobby that really helps me in so many ways, personally and professionally. And I encourage all people, especially the busiest people out there, to find a hobby, something that doesn't relate to work and fills them up. And, it could be anything from yoga to painting to riding horses to playing the electric guitar. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. It's just something of your choosing that really helps you escape.
It would have been even more imaginative of me because I knew that, if we'd done this podcast while you were riding a horse. Now, that would have been even more impressive on many levels, but perhaps that's the next one. It
sure would have been.
Yeah, there you go. And a more philosophical question, what impact are you looking to have on the world around you through your work?
Yeah. I feel like life is really short, quite frankly, and it's definitely too short for work to go suboptimized, for it to kind of suck, right? We spend so much of our time and our emotional energy at work. And so honestly, the impact that I want to have is to help people, specifically leaders, thrive at work. And the reason why leaders are my focus is because when leaders are thriving, everybody wins. The whole system wins. And so that's the impact I want to have.
Beautiful. Dina, I love the clarity and your conviction, and you've given us a huge, I guess, appreciation of the role of emotions at work and in life more generally, and how we really need to up our game. And you've given us tasters of the frameworks that are included in your book and some great examples that I imagine many of us will be thinking, tomorrow I might be in that situation and perhaps how I could do it differently. It's powerful material. It's well done. You've also given a flavour of yourself, which I really appreciate. So thank you ever so much for such a great conversation.
Well, thank you. I really, really appreciate the opportunity.
Where can people find out more about you and your work and services and book? Where should they go online?
Come to my website. It's Dina, D-I-N-A-D, Smith, SMITH.com. It's my website. And then I'd love for you to connect with me on LinkedIn if we're not already connected. Dina Denham Smith.
Wonderful. Brilliant. Love the conversation. Love your work. Big hats off to you, to use the riding analogy. Fantastic. That was another edition of Lancefield on the Line. I do hope you enjoyed this episode as much as I did. Please do check out the other episodes in the series. Sign up to the YouTube channel, to the podcast with great emotion, and give us a 5-star rating if you're feeling generous. Dina, thank you ever so much again.